Oh, nice. Let's see, it looks like good morning, everybody.
Morning, Lisa. It's afternoon.
Afternoon.
Oh, gosh. Yes, it is. We're gonna give it a few minutes and let people populate.
Enter.
We totally understand if you're in your home and you don't want to be seen for some reason, you're not ready for prime time, but we're trying to keep this personal and a community discussion. So if you're comfortable turning your camera on, we would love that. Hello. Give it a few more minutes, and I don't know that we'll share this recording, but we are recording this meeting in the event that there were people who couldn't get here and they might like to see it. So just wanted everybody to be aware that this is being recorded. Good morning. I think we probably ought to start. This is while we have a group, let me introduce and identify those of us who organize this meeting, but also make it clear that we include everybody here as part of the group. I'm Lisa Haggerty. You guys probably know me, former chair of the select board. Josie Keitel, Heather Snyder, Beth Gadbois, Brenna Galzani. Brenna, if I've said your last name wrong, please correct me. And there are a few others who helped organize, Marina Meerberg and Mila Lanetto, and they're unable to attend today. The purpose of this meeting is to just create awareness that there was an ordinance passed by the select board on February 29th related to a new registry for short-term rentals. Since then, there was a petition for a vote, which is just an up or down vote. It's not to edit. It is to rescind the ordinance that was passed on the 29th. And that vote will take place on May 1st at 6 o'clock at the Stowe High School. The format of that vote will be like town meeting. It's a floor vote. And that's because at town meeting, we voted that issues will remain voted on by floor vote versus a ballot vote. So it's not like the polls are open all day and you go in and you vote. It starts at 6 and you go in and cast a vote in person. We'll kind of get to that later as to how that might work. But the goals of this meeting are to create awareness for the ordinance and what it does and doesn't say. The vote that will take place on May 1st, that it's an up or down vote to either keep that ordinance in place or rescind it. To clear up what we feel is confusion about what the ordinance says and doesn't say. And then to maybe address how to vote and to see if we need to meet again. I think we probably will. We'll try to do another one of these perhaps in the evening for people who couldn't be here. We do want to keep this civil, and we're really not here today to debate. We're kind of here to share information. And we'll obviously, we have our chat, which is one way. So if you want to get information to us as a group, a question, there will be one of the group here monitoring the questions. And we can also share some documents with you. The comment isn't to be like a side conversation. And we do ask that you just sort of, in the spirit, I think, of our posts, which was to keep it civil. We're here to discuss. We want to share information. We'd really appreciate keeping it in that spirit. So I think I'd like to get on to, are most of you familiar? Do you have the ordinance? And so I guess I'm going to just run through what I believe are the facts. On February 29th, after 10 months of discussion, testimony, and research, the Select Board passed the Stowe short-term rental registry ordinance. The vote was 3-2. And while that may seem like a divided vote, it is a legitimate vote of the majority of a representative government. So it was a legitimate vote. The ordinance as written does not restrict anyone's ability to short-term rent their property as long as they fill out a registration form with the town and agree to have a local responsible party, and that person can be the owner themselves, a friend. It doesn't have to be a rental agent, who can respond to an emergency within 45 minutes. So that is what the registry does. The questions that have been identified that will be on the registration form will look like this: physical address of the property, contact information for the property owner, and drilling down to an actual person. So name, mailing address, phone, and email. Contact information for the designated responsible party, which is just that person who is responsible for getting someone there within 45 minutes. So let's just say I'm the owner of a short-term rental, which I have been and plan to be in the future, just out of, full transparency. And I know that others of us in the group are also have been short-term rental people and are in favor of this. So if you were to be your own designated responsible party, and let's just say that's what you've been in the past, you haven't registered your property, you've been short-term renting, and you're your designated person, you still can be, even if you're out of the country, but you gotta have a friend or somebody who you've said, hey, I'm gonna be somewhere, and I need you to respond if I text you, because presumably if you're the responsible party, you're gonna get the call from the Stowe Fire Department, and then it is your responsibility to get to your designated person quickly so that they can meet the fire department there to deal with any issue that might happen. So I just want to clarify that this designated responsible party can be you, can be a rental agent, it can be your son or daughter. Whoever it is, though, is the responsible party. Ultimately, The owner is responsible for any fees and fines, so you are the ultimate responsible person, but it is your responsibility to make sure that somebody gets there when they're called. It is, you are required to post who the designated responsible party is in your Airbnb, in a place where people can see it. While that is a requirement of this ordinance, it is currently a requirement of the state fire and safety. So this isn't new. It's just something that a lot of people weren't aware of. So I think that part of, and I digress here a little bit, but part of this ordinance is also the opportunity for people to be aware of some state regulations that they may not be aware of and should be in compliance with already. So posting the designated responsible person for the property in the property is a requirement of the ordinance, but is also a requirement already. Owners of short-term rental property shall ensure that the Stowe Fire Department has year-round 24-hour access to the short-term rental through an approved fire department lockbox or other reasonable means of providing access. So that is, you know, quite honestly, we discussed this a lot, and really, the fire department would love it if everybody did this. But it's super important for people who are, you know, for homes that are being occupied by people that might be there for 2 or 3 days and have no idea, you know, and maybe just gone. And the police need to get there. They need to get into the house. And so this seemed like common sense. And you know, we had a lot of people say that, gosh, why don't people just do that voluntarily? And that would be great. I think the fire department would appreciate anybody who wasn't a short-term renter, or maybe who had long-term rentals that did that. Payment of the registration fee. And I'm going to make, so here we did say we were going to stick to facts, and I'm going to do the best I can here. What I did want to do was to put a realistic estimate bound on what that fee is likely to look like. So here's how it's believed that the high-end total cost, we had a very high-end presentation, and they said $85,000 to administer this software service. There will also be some administrative time by the town. The scope of our ordinance is such that we don't believe that it will be the $85,000 version, so it's likely to be less. It's a fairly narrow ordinance. And so let's just say $100,000, I think, is a good estimate. It's solidly believed that we have about 1,000 units. There are people that think it's 1,500, and there are some that say it's 500 units. So let's call $100,000 and 500 units the worst case. And the worst case is that fee would be $200 a unit if there were only 500 and the cost was, let's put it at the maximum. So I hope this feels like a reasonable way to estimate this. If the number is 1,500 units, then that could be as low as $66. My guess is it's somewhere in the middle, but we are very confident of that range. So the idea that we have no idea what the budget is and no idea what that isn't true. What we are not certain yet, and I keep saying I'm no longer there. So it's not been that long. So Excuse me for saying we. What I believe, and what was discussed when I was there, is that in an effort to protect the smaller people who, not smaller people, people who are renting out a room, residents who are, yes, let's just say renting out rooms, not their whole house, to supplement income. It's unlikely that they are going to pay the same fee as somebody who's renting a large house. So let's just say that within that estimate range of, say, 66 at the cheapest end and 200 at the highest end, it's likely that those costs will be distributed by the size of the unit. So smaller homes and people who are renting out a bedroom will, I firmly believe, will not be paying anything like $200. So that's fees. Registration will be immediate for those who fill out the form. It will be electronic. Provide the information and pay the fee. It's not something that people will have to wonder about. That's not the way it works. So you fill out the information and you pay your fee like you do so many other things that we get licenses for. And renewal will be the same. So annually, you will renew, if you're a renter, you'll be required to renew your registration. It is true that it would be illegal by the nature of this ordinance, and lots of ordinance make things illegal in this town, but it just sounds, we don't usually say yes, but it would be illegal and fines could be levied for not registering and renting as a short-term rental. That is a fact of this ordinance. You could also be fined if you filled out a registration and it was found that you were not truthful on your registration form. And let's just say you said you were renting out a bedroom and the fire department had to get there for an emergency and they arrived to a 6-bedroom house, but you did that to pay $50 instead of $200, whatever it is. Yeah, that would be having provided not accurate or truthful information on your registration form. And then failing to have the local responsible party or the lockbox, which would be discovered at an emergency. It's like people aren't going to be out there hunting for it. The only thing that, quote, is going to be swept will be that the software company does sweep the platforms and they do compare it to our registry. That does not mean that somebody automatically gets a fee. Somebody's going to get a letter and say, are you renting? It looks like you're not registered. And they'll be given the opportunity to either say, nope, that's an old, for any of us who have done this, I've tried to delist several times and I still get sometimes requests to rent my house. And I'm like, I didn't even know I was still listed. So, there are those possibilities that you could be swept up and you might get a letter and you call and say, I'm not renting. I don't have a registration in, I'm not renting, shouldn't be there. Or you say, oh gosh, I didn't even know there was a registry. I'll register. No fees, no fines. I think it's, I've heard some criticism that the town has a lot of ordinances in place right now that they don't properly enforce. So how could we possibly take on another one? Again, I shouldn't say we, so I'll try to correct that. It was 12 years. It is, I think it's more representative that the ordinances in this town are largely meant to inspire certain behaviors that as a community we would like to see happen. We need information on this particular one. We want to help public safety. If you're, you know, fines aren't, they're needed because that's what ordinances, you know, the ordinances have fines because unfortunately there are some people for whom that is the stick. But mostly the town is interested in the behavior and not the fine. So I just want to kind of clear up that, yeah, you could look at it as a failure to enforce, or you could look at it as, I think the way our town managers would look at it, that they are forgiving for people who either didn't know, didn't mean to, are going to correct it. They're forgiving. I mean, how many of you have been pulled over on the Moscow Road and gotten a warning? I know I have. And I know they're just dying to grab me, but it's just that's, I consider that forgiving. Let's see. Yeah, but if somebody repeatedly fails to comply with these basic requirements, repeatedly ignores warnings and requests to comply, it is possible and probable at that point that fees would be imposed. And yeah, they could accumulate. And I saw some numbers that were like, you know, $280,000. I'm sure that's an extrapolation of, you know, the highest fee. I haven't done the math, but I'm sure it is possible that that could happen. But that would mean that somebody just like ignored it for, I suppose, an entire year. And I guess theoretically they would owe that much money. We actually have spoken to other towns who, when the process was going through, and I think it was Killington, and you know, the guy was like very honest. He's like, look, we don't want to foreclose on anyone's house. We're not, but we want the person to list. So, you know, they negotiated, they got the person to get on the registry, and they didn't impose this huge fine or take their house. I just think that represents how these things would happen. So,
Lisa, can I add a point in there, because
yeah,
I think it
please.
just maybe to give you water, even though I'm pretty sick, so I apologize to everyone. And the interesting thing is I don't own a dog, but I had to go and look up our animal control ordinance because lots of people were starting to talk about that. So I read that, and the process of the penalties is commiserate with the short-term rental. The process is the same, and the fees that if you don't register your dog, you are in violation and you get fines, and those keep mounting. If you have an egregious, in fact, they can A, impound your dog, and B, they can add a daily rate. So basically the policy is almost identical to the short-term rental. And from my understanding, and I think I've asked this, but Lisa, have we ever taken, in your experience for 12 years, have we ever foreclosed on someone's house for not registering their dog?
No.
I just want to make it equitable so people understand from an ordinance perspective what the enforcement and the penalties are there, and historically, just to kind of give another reference point.
Thanks. But I guess I don't want to debunk the fact that somebody could owe that much money if that's the way the math works out. As I said, I haven't done it, but I saw the cartoon. And yeah, it's possible. But if you actually look at what you would have to do to get there, it would, you'd have just completely ignored a law for over the course of a year and continued to rent your home or whatever it was. So I don't want to say that that's patently untrue. It just would take a behavior that we are actually, that we as a, at least as a majority of a group, decided was not fair to those who were going to comply and register. So let's see, I got into that. Annual renewal is required. The Stowe Fire Department is wholly behind this ordinance. And while the process, I've heard lots of criticisms, it was passed in a legal, transparent, it was legally warned, and a by the books process. You know, it's funny, we did hold the meeting, the special meeting during school vacation, and it left a lot of people with, you know, a bad taste in their mouth. There were a lot of people at that meeting. We've held our informational meeting for town meeting every single year that I've been on the select board, and long before, during school vacation. So it isn't unprecedented in any way that we continue to hold our meetings, and important ones, sort of on the select board schedule, because this vote wasn't a popular vote. It was a vote of the select board. And we had been taking testimony on this for months. And yeah, so I think just to understand the process, it was a vote of the select board as representative government. It wasn't a vote. It wasn't a popular vote of who was in the room. Public hearings at that final hour, I think for me, it's like, what am I going to learn new? Is it possible that I'm going to learn something new that will change my mind? And that has happened. Brenna, you convinced me. You know, it's not like it doesn't happen. So anyway, this is not, let's keep this on track. So I think those are, have I left out any of the facts related to the ordinance itself that any of my group who are supposed to keep me on track?
You might want to talk about the intent of the ordinance. I've seen it, people have questions about
the
data
purpose
collection.
and the intent. So absolutely. I hope that people have read the ordinance, but would it be helpful if I summarized it or just actually read the purpose statement? But the two main points here are, I think it's actually, I'm going to read the purpose because I think it was well crafted. And it was actually one of the lawyers who had been listening, sort of, I hate to call it on the opposition side, but she had been advocating for the real estate community and some STR property owners, and she had been at all the meetings, and I think summarized really nicely. I think a very nice purpose statement that we all got behind. The town of Stowe values its history and status as a vibrant year-round mountain resort town and recognizes the significant benefit to the local economy and community stemming from tourism. The purpose of this ordinance is to seek balance the well-established practice of renting residential dwelling units to traveling transients and the visiting public. And I think this is key, while preserving the character of residential neighborhoods and minimizing the potential negative impacts of short-term rentals, and continuing to promote public health, safety, and welfare of visitors and residents, both full and part-time. So absolutely acknowledging that this short-term rental thing is part of the fabric of this community and part of our economic balance, but that economics aren't everything in this equation. It's important, but also public safety and the character of residential neighborhoods. That's, I think, also very important. By establishing an orderly process for identifying short-term rental properties in the town, and compiling a database of the designated responsible person, and emergency contact information for each short-term rental property, the town intends to ensure an effective and expedient response to an emergency that may arise in connection with a short-term rental. And let me just finish the last of it, but it did trigger when an owner is the designated party, the designated person, and they're not short-term renting their property, they're carved out of this. So there were a lot of areas where there were accommodations made where it seemed to make sense if somebody's just living in their own house, that they're not short-term renters at that time. Furthermore, through the establishment of a dynamic registry of short-term rental properties, the town seeks to gather information regarding the practice of renting residential dwelling units on a short-term basis, so the town may better evaluate and determine through data what regulation of such rental properties, if warranted, is appropriate and consistent with the best interests of the town, its residents, full and part-time, and visitors. And so I think, like anything, we can read text messages in the voice that we want to hear them in, and we can read certain words the way we want to hear them. I know there are a lot of people who have focused on to better evaluate and determine through data what regulation of such rental properties, rather than taking a pause and also reading if warranted. So the data here and through the whole process, I feel pretty confident, and again, this is not a fact, but I feel pretty confident that 80% of the people wanted data. It's like, where's the data? What's the data? And
Lisa, can
yeah.
you talk about dynamic data
Yes.
versus a housing study and a snapshot in time?
Thank you. So there it is, a housing study, which we actually think should be done, will take quite some time, and will be a study that is looking at historical data and creating a picture of a snapshot in time, and then making projections from that. The beauty of dynamic data is that it's constantly giving you new information. And the example that I like to use in this particular thing is, well, what does that mean? How could we use it in real time? A new registry comes on. If a house sells, I might have skipped that one. So if you have if a property is registered and then changes hands, there are 30 days for the new owner, if they intend to short-term rent it, to update that registration to the new ownership. So let's just say a house sells and it is a new registry. let's just say it hasn't been one before. So we get a registration. And if we want to, in this housing study that we're doing to try to understand what's going on in the town, we take a look at that new registration address and probably can identify pretty quickly whether that was a residence or a vacation home. If it was a vacation home that changed hands and just was another vacation home, that's interesting. If it was a former homestead home and is now purely a short-term rental home, you can look at the calendar and see that it's, and that pattern continues. One home is not going to be something that triggers alarm, but a dynamic process would allow us to see the town, and I guess now when I say us, I'm talking us as a community, would allow us to see the pattern, right? Is there a pattern or is there not? And if there isn't, and there are just as many, then there isn't a problem. So then there's nothing to be afraid of. And I would venture to say that there's nothing to be afraid of. If you're a short-term renter, manager of short-term rentals, there's nothing in this ordinance that restricts short-term renting, except perhaps the fee and to get online and type in your information. So yeah, that is, I think that's an important, thank you, Heather, for bringing that up. That dynamic data, I think, is really much more and is going to be informative. It lends texture and reality to the housing study that we can see in real time, and it's very specific to our community. It's very specific. It's very drilled down. It's going to be very helpful. Do we want to go on to what the vote is going to look like? Or
We have one question that I was
Oh,
going to,
yeah.
because I think it's something we've talked about and I'd love your guys' input. So Liz asks, one of the things I hear people saying, which I've heard the same thing, one of the things people have been saying is that all homes should be registered with public safety, fire and police. So we had the fire chief, right? One of the big proponents of this is the fire chief. And so a lot of people are saying all homes should be registered. I know that all homes have 911 registrations, correct? Question mark. Does that include a contact person? So if you could kind of comment on what's the difference between this versus why don't we have all homes registered and have contact information, and why is there a distinction?
So that's a lot of questions. Let me start with, is it a requirement by our public safety that all homes have this currently? No. Everyone has to have their 911 registered address. Would we like, as a community, to require everyone to have a designated person at the fire department? I'm going to guess that they would say yes. At the moment, and there's nothing that would keep us from doing that. There's also nothing that keeps anyone from voluntarily providing that data to the police. And in fact, one of the things that we had discussed is when we have this software and this compliance company, they may actually help us build that kind of a database on behalf of public safety, so that because we would have this mechanism, it may in fact be extremely helpful. the fact of the matter is short-term rentals have been identified by our public safety as being a problem. And I think as I drill down on it, one of the biggest, I think, problems is if for some reason that rental becomes uninhabitable, carbon monoxide, and the people have to leave. And now you have your fire chief and some volunteers who are up in the middle of the night having to be like a concierge to, it's those things where you have very, very nervous, displaced people. If it's a busy weekend, there's nowhere, there's nowhere to go. And there should be a person for those people to be left with so that the fire department can leave. And so I think that, when you try to imagine what the situations are, I think that is the kind of situation. And that more often than not, it is short-term renters that don't know how to use their wood stoves, their fire, and it requires a call from our public safety people that could be getting called up to any one of our, house fires, heart attacks, whatever it is, but they're off because just someone didn't know how to use it. And with a long-term rental, typically they know the house almost like a, almost like a resident. And if you live there, you know how to work your things. So those things don't happen as often. Any other questions about, before we move on to how the vote's going to work? Because one of the goals of this is to make sure that people know there's a vote. If they care enough to show up because they think this is a good idea for the town, what that vote's going to look like, what the format is, and we thought we'd run through that. Is it a good time to do that?
Yeah, we have one more question real quick that just came through, and people, if that's working for you, just to send questions, I'm happy to read them out as long as you're fine with me croaking. Last I heard, the software we are planning on using, which none of us are part of the town, so we're not sure the answers to this. But the last software we are planning on using is creating for the registry database was $90,000 per year. Is that an accurate figure?
So we had a presentation by a group called Granicus that quoted $85,000 at the high end, because it was a scope that was far beyond, I think, what we were interested in. Granicus for us was like a proxy. It's not I think a lot of people thought, oh, that's who they're going to use. There are 5 or 6 well-known software companies who, who do this line of work. So as is the process, one of the reasons why this date goes out to March 2025 is now that the ordinance is passed, then the town goes about the process of putting out a request for proposal from companies that do this and looking at, let's just say 3 proposals meet the requirements, and then they look at price and quality and all of the recommendations, and they make a choice. And then we have our software company. So I would say that $85,000, and if it was 90, I apologize, but I think it was 85, was a number that was quoted by somebody that we used as a proxy. And I understand that they are among the higher priced of the groups that do it. And they are not who we have. There has been no selection made. No selection could be made and no request for proposals could be made until the select board passed an ordinance.
Thanks, Lisa. We have a question here. True or false, can this ordinance be modified or amended at the sole discretion of the select board, which could include regulations such as a ban, cap, or moratorium without public input?
True or false, could that happen? that could happen with or without this ordinance. I mean, I don't think that would ever happen. But true or false, could it happen? It could happen with or without this ordinance. That is true.
So we
With-
don't need the ordinance.
So let me just say, can you read all of that? I'm really trying to.
Sure. The question is true or false? Can this ordinance be modified or amended at the sole discretion of the select board? So that's actually a little bit different.
Okay, at the
Question.
sole discretion of the select board, and then finish it up without any public input?
Which could
Correct.
include regulations such as ban, cap, or moratorium without public input.
No.
The option for
If
public
it
input
was-
is
okay, now
always
let me,
allowed.
I'm really trying to answer this factually. If it was part of an ordinance, if that was done through an amendment to an ordinance, then it would have to go through the ordinance process, which by its very nature has a public hearing, probably has many meetings like we did leading up to this one, and a lot of compromise like this one. So the answer is, if it's in the ordinance, false. It could never happen without public input and at the sole discretion of the select board. And then if that did happen in an ordinance, there is this process, right, that is happening right now, that a petition could then be, so if something very egregious, if that's what we're afraid of in the future, then this process could then be gone through to put a check and balance on future regulation. I am not an expert, but if it was outside of an ordinance, I can't say with 100% certainty. So that's all I'm trying to be very factual here, that there's a process that isn't an ordinance, that the select board could just ban it without any input from anybody. I don't think so, but I don't know that. I know how an ordinance works and that there are public hearings and all that.
And
Thanks.
every select board meeting has a time where the public commentary.
Every single select board meeting at the end. And I will just clarify that certainly the town manager and the select board love a heads up. Not because, you hate to be caught off guard or whatever. It's more like we can answer the question better if someone's given us a heads up, and a little research can be done so that, like this answer I just gave on the non-ordinance piece of it, like, oh, I'd like to have Charles research that, like to hear from, and then we have better information for you right then and there. But if you don't do that and something, pops into your mind and you really, really want to bring it up to the select board at the next meeting, you can do that. It's at the end of the meeting and it's called, open for, now I've forgotten exactly what it's called. That's ridiculous.
Public comment.
Public comment. Thank you.
Should we take another question? We have a question. Is Granicus currently working on the town website? And Will Frick is on this Zoom and answered yes. Maybe we want to unmute him and he could explain.
I don't know that there's much, but Will, you're welcome to, but I believe Granicus was already hired to do a website project.
Which is separate from the ordinance?
Oh, completely separate. We're updating the town website, and that was made through a separate RFP process. And yes.
Has nothing to do with the,
Will, are you on? You might just be. But
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm on. If you want me to, I mean, honestly, Lisa, you might know more context than I was because I wasn't here. But in my understanding is that so the select board awarded Granicus the website contracts before the short-term rental discussion even started, and they asked them during the development of the website because the short-term rental stuff came up, and they asked them if they knew anything about regulating it, basically, like as an aside, and so they offered the person to come talk to the select board.
thank you, Will. So that was, Granicus was first working on updating, we're doing a whole revamping of our entire website, which is absolutely
Necessary.
and the whole thing's going to be more user friendly and information is going to be easier to find. And they also do this. So when this whole thing came up, it was like, oh, could you tell us about, could you come in and talk to us about what it is that you do and how this all works? So it was really just demystifying this process, and they did that.
Lisa, we have another question here from Susie Grimes.
Yeah.
If we really want to know the total number and location of STRs in Stowe, why are the owners of STRs within hotels being exempt, i.e. Spruce Peak, Traps, Top Notch? Will Frick did answer it. Hi, Susie. Those types of STRs are included in the definition of STR in the ordinance. They are not exempt, in my view. Do you wish to expand upon that in any way? Or is that your understanding as well?
Oh, it is absolutely my understanding. The only thing that so there is a distinction of a hotel unit. So let's take Stowe Mountain Lodge as an example. There are units that are hotel owned, managed by Hilton, I think. There are units that are owned by individuals and in a rental pool. Those units that are not owned by the hotel fall into this short-term rental pool. The accommodation that we made is those are largely managed, those big, conglomerates by like Hilton, or, that if you manage a lot of properties, that your property manager, not that they would be, that you have this layer of not getting to the actual owner between you, but they can submit the information for you. They can work with the town to make sure that all of those units get into the registry so that people who perhaps rarely come have that service as well. We allowed them to input that information, but it would have to be the same information. We need to know who the owner is, the ultimate owner, and all of that. So those are counted.
And they would still have to pay the registration fee like everybody else.
Absolutely.
Yes. So we have a question from Max Levine here. What I'm hearing from those against the ordinance is generally some version of this isn't a registry, it's a first step in policing STRs. And that's followed by a lot of what sounds scary, but things I don't see. These include issues with enforcement, the involvement of the hotel industry in both pushing an anti-STR agenda, and that the hotel industry has some control over the software that will be used. Can these issues be addressed, please? Thanks. I can read it again if you want.
So that's a lot. I am just going to say, so, I had never, I need to shut a door. Hold on. Again, 12 years on the select board, and I've worked on several ordinances, but I had never heard the term police powers used. It's just where so I think again, yes, technically ordinances are an exercise of police powers. It doesn't mean that the police are gonna do it. It's a term that I think has become scary, and it's really just something that as a community, it's what we would like for people to do, and have found that, you know, probably most people would do it if we asked them to do it, but the ones that we really need to do it, unfortunately, won't without some sort of penalty. And I don't know, like there are, as we know, in all things that try to, you know, I know that there are lobbying groups out there in this whole STR world. It felt like to me, we were being lobbied. A lot of that's what it felt like to me. I might have erroneously, no, it's what it felt like. A lot of the letters were form letters. A lot of them were very unique, but a lot of the letters looked like they had been pre-written, and you know, there was a personalization at the top and the bottom. So that's how it felt. Am I aware? I know that there are national lobbying groups, but specifically to Stowe, am I aware of anything other than what I was feeling? Absolutely not. I don't, there was nobody behind this. It was our, you know, just, we have a little information, but I want to just, and I don't want to bore people, but, pre-COVID, so I'm, you know, we all lose track of time. I'm going to say for 7 years, of my 12 on the select board, housing's been an issue. I've been a part of housing groups, by nonprofits, by the by Lamoille County, by like everybody's trying to tackle this problem. And our own planning commission and several of the members have been, you know, a part of these on and off, and people who aren't on the planning commission. And you know, you kind of see the same faces of people who are trying to wrap their heads around this problem. And then COVID comes. So everybody's trying to solve different problems, but post-COVID, you know, we all know remote work, lots of STRs, lots of traffic, boomed up, and I think we've now hit a new normal, which is still high, and good, right? It's good for the town, but it is a new level of activity. And it was not this past year, but the year before that we heard from public safety, like, we have a problem. It was in the annual report the year before. And then we had a group called the Working Communities Challenge, which was a group that was formed to receive a large grant from the Fed in Boston. And a big part of that study, that grant, was to study housing and its impacts on employment. You know, it was trying to help with, so it's a housing supply, and short-term rentals were identified within that study as being an issue. So we didn't just, there is data, like there are a lot of people that have been studying this all over the place, and we felt like it was the time. It felt like we could handle it. COVID was under control, town was in pretty good shape, and housing and public safety were the hot buttons. And this was the first thing we did to try to address it. Any other questions? Do people, are you guys interested? I think we have.
I think next steps, I think lots of people, some people have been asking, like, what's the
Like, what's
process
next?
moving forward? What's next? Which I think you have. Don't worry, if you have other questions, I will still handle them. We'll identify them and read them out. And, you know, if we get to the point, this is seeming to work, if people want to raise their hand, they can do that. But yeah, what's May 1st, Lisa?
Okay,
And what does that mean?
so just let me, again, sticking to the facts. This is the warning for the meeting on May 1st. And this is one line. This is what people, us, you all, should you choose to be there, are going to be asked to vote on. Shall the voters rescind the Stowe short-term rental registry ordinance adopted February 29th, 2024? Simple as that. Should it hold? Or should it be rescinded? So just to be clear, because this is a fact, we have talked to some people who signed the petition to rescind this petition with this language on it. You know, and I only called people I know. I wasn't calling to harass people. But people that I knew, I was like, wow, yeah. And so 4 for 4, those people were unaware that that's what this was. They thought maybe it could be tweaked. They were like, you know, oh, we're going to work on this. And they just didn't understand what they were signing, and it was out in front of town meeting, and you know, they signed it. They are not interested in fact, they're, at least those few are interested in coming to support keeping the ordinance in place as is. So that's not myth, that is a fact. And it is a fact that this is what you'll be voting on. So it's a rescission. The vote is a floor vote. And I hope most of you, I shouldn't say that, but if you've been to town meeting and you've been a part of a caucus of any sort or a floor vote, you kind of know what it's going to look like, but it isn't where you come in and you click a box and leave. It is a commitment of some time. And, you know, this is a place where democracy really matters, and it's going to take a little effort if you, you know, really believe in this. And so what you do is you come 6 o'clock, May 1st, high school auditorium. It holds 300 people. There were 300 people thereabouts that signed the petition. So clearly we probably will have some overflow. And so there may be other rooms used, or perhaps that gets amended and it's in the gymnasium. But one way or the other, everyone who shows up will be accommodated. I am not on the select board now, so I won't be setting the rules, but from what I am hearing, I believe that only Stowe resident voters will be in the room. I don't think there's going to be capacity to have others. And there isn't Zoom capability in that facility. So I believe that this will be, and Heather, do you have a question?
There's an excellent question here. Someone is asking, how do you ensure they are all Stowe voters? And
Okay.
the town clerk was at the meeting that set the vote and gave instructions on how, and Lisa, maybe you can go into the paper.
Yes, and she's very, like, she's on it. And, you know, town meeting, no doubt, could have gone smoother. And the good news for this process is that that just happened. And I think as a group, everybody learned a lot about how this one needs to go to be fair. And so there will be very careful checking of who's a voter and the process. And I'd like to discuss how to get it there so that people know the final count, if there's any question, and I think it regardless can be a paper vote if Robert's rules are followed, which I'm certain they will be. So I think the way it works is you'll sit down and there will be the opportunity for people to speak for and against. And I believe the intention will be to have one then the other and then one then the other, so it doesn't, sound like 10 of one side and then 2 of another, and then somebody calls the question. Calling the question so that at any point in time that the vote is called. So there's a thing called calling the question. So if anybody can call the question, at that point, 2/3 of the individuals in the room would need to agree. So there's a vote on whether it's time to vote. So if everybody, let's just say everybody gets there and they know how they're going to vote, right? Like if that is the case, I don't know. But if people aren't there to learn from one another, then potentially everybody just wants to vote and go home. So I would imagine that there will be at least there will be some pro and con, and someone might call the question. It's 50-50. Okay, everybody sits down and the talking goes on, one then the other, one then the other. Somebody calls the question, and let's say an hour's gone by and everybody feels like all right, it's time. 2/3 or more of the people stand up. Now it's a vote. So at that point, the moderator will say, okay, the vote has been called, 2/3 aye, and that's how it'll be, aye, or if there's any question, stand up. The vote itself, the first vote will be a voice vote. You don't have to stand up, but it'll be one of those things where it's like, okay, all those in favor, and it's aye, and you hear the nay. And when it's really obvious, nobody questions it. Like it's, when it's very obvious. If there's any question in general of which side had more, the next step would be a separation of the room, and ayes would go to one side and nays would go to the other, and people get counted. That doesn't have to happen. At the point at which a voice vote has created confusion, one person can call for a paper ballot, and they need 6 other people to agree with that. And I think that is absolutely I think everybody in the room on either side, I felt like when I watched the tape of the select board meeting, that was probably going to be the best way. So somebody calls for the paper ballot, 6 people support that, and the clerk will be prepared. So there will be a process. You will and they will have thought through the controls, that you can't give it to somebody else. You actually have to be there. There will be a process.
There will be a checklist.
There will be a voter checklist.
They will check the voter checklist for a paper ballot as well.
Voter checklist when you hand your so there will be checks and balances on this process, and I just wanted to make sure that people and share this with people, that what it's going to look like, how it's going to work, and what you can feel empowered to do if you wish. If you just want to be silent and wait for that paper vote because that's your comfort zone, I believe that opportunity will be available to you, but you ought to speak when that first voice vote comes, because you don't want to be silent. You don't have to stand up and then not ever get to the paper vote because you stayed silent and, you know, that voice vote never got to the next stage. That's what that's going to look like.
Lisa, we have a few more minutes, so if anybody has questions for us, you in particular, it'd be a great time for them to either raise their little hands or write it down there, or you could go over some of the
So
objections you've heard, possibly, you know.
So one thing I would like to do, I'd like to invite, obviously, I am strongly in support of keeping this ordinance. So, I mean, that's, so I feel very comfortable saying, that if, and you know, this group is, I hope that what we've done here is provide facts though. But if any of you out there know that you're solidly in favor of this, we invite you. I don't think that anybody else can see the comment section. Is that true? It's only us?
I think everyone can see the comments. So we didn't, it's, yeah.
It's not hidden. So if you're comfortable one way or the other, if you would like to be listed
Or send it to me only.
publicly in support of the ordinance, so that we can start gathering names of people who are in favor of it. I think it's important. So because it's part of the myth debunking. Yes, there were a lot of people who have come out not in favor of this, but over the course of the year, and over the course of the many meetings before it got very heated in the final month and a half, 2 months, so many people were in favor of this and still were, but felt like they had voiced their voices, and knowing that it was representative government, that we would hold those voices, you know, they don't disappear, as we moved forward. And I lost what were we talking about? Oh, so names. So I think it is important. There's been a pretty good organized group against, and good on, you know, it's very well organized. For those of us who are in favor, leaving emptiness, it gets filled. So I think that we ought to do the same. And so at least there are people out there that don't think they're alone if they're in favor of this.
Lisa, I'm gonna just add my story to it just to help everyone. I make all of my income off a short-term rental. I've been doing it for 8 years. I am a Stowe long-term resident. I'm very engaged. A lot of my friends look for me for advice on information. And frankly, several of my friends were surprised I didn't sign the short-term, the repeal. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm in full support. I've been attending these meetings for a year. I've been reviewing, I've been giving my insight. And I think that people started to listen to some of the information and not read the ordinance. So I think, and what we're getting is a lot of information about people being relieved by the information and support. So, you know, I think we're all here wanting the same thing, is to be successful as a community, to be successful as individuals. And in my strong belief and informed belief, this will help us get to that next stage. So I just wanted to add that, so because you've done such a great job of informing, but we've all been cheerleaders behind you and also participating. I'd said multiple times that I was in support of this, and then people were like, because they don't sit in 4-hour select board meetings. Who wants to sit in 4-hour select board meetings? I don't. Lisa did for years. So we're getting some more feedback.
I see a hand, and I know we have both. I see Susan.
Oh, Susan Romes. I have to let you off. Hold on. I can ask you to unmute. Just introduce your name, and are you from Stowe? Are you a Stowe voter?
I'm from Stowe. I used to live in Denver. You were just saying what's good for Stowe. And I'm saying, what brand is good for Stowe? When people would come from out of town and visit me and my husband in Denver, and they'd say, where should we go ski? I see Vail is really close. I would say, and my husband would agree, oh, you really want to go to a real town, don't you? So go to Steamboat. I mean, it was all I'm saying is that there are states that underwrite empty farmland so that they will remain pretty to tourists. The point is, we need to think about what's good for Stowe and some understanding of how much it looks like a real town, a community, is really important. It's really what people want to see is the real Vermont.
Anybody else have any, I mean, these are really great. I think these are really nice stories to hear. I have always felt that what distinguishes us as a destination is the fact that we are a community. And I felt it, for years. I was a second homeowner before I moved here. And the coolest thing that ever happened, I thought, was rolling down Main Street and seeing a little sign that pointed to the rink. It was the old Jackson Arena. And it was like, hockey game tonight. And we pulled in, and it was like, it was Stowe's little Friday night lights. And it was the coolest thing. And then everybody went to the malt shop. And then, and I was like, I want to live in a town like this. And I think, I never really dreamed I would, but it did happen. And I think there are a lot of people who pull in here and are like, I would really like to live in a town like this. And that's the piece of it that we don't want to lose. That's the piece we don't want to lose. It is our special sauce. I really do think that's our special sauce. Anybody else? Questions? Anything? If not, I do just want to, the one thing I want people, well, so many things, but the one thing that I really want people to walk away with, it's the combination of two questions, I think. This ordinance does not restrict anyone's ability to rent. It does require them to register and pay a fee. Then there was a question of, could the select board, either through an ordinance, and I couldn't answer the other side, like in the future, just ban short-term rentals? Yeah, but not without public input. And it wouldn't be because of this ordinance. This ordinance isn't the trigger. So, yes, a select board could write an ordinance with a ban in it. Not without your input, and not without your ability to do what's being done now, which is to question it and to put the vote out to the community. So with that trigger and process in mind, I don't know why everybody's so afraid of this one. It's been baffling to me.
Let me give an example from a public safety perspective of why I think it's valuable. When the pandemic hit and everything was shut down, at that time I was working for a local real estate company managing 27 properties myself. Other people in the office were running short-term rentals as well. And at that time, when the governor said we need to shut down the state, actually it was before the governor said we need to shut down the state, I got an email from a woman named Katie Dolbeck, who has a house here in Stowe, and she's an ER physician at UVM Medical Center. And she said, please stop renting houses. We don't know whether we will have hospital beds for people. And very shortly after that, the governor shut the state down. But I was aware that people were still renting their houses. And it was a lot of people who didn't know that they weren't allowed to do that, that we were taking these public health measures. And I went on one of the very first Zooms that the select board did in an emergency fashion, as we all figured out how to reformat our lives to lockdown. And that's when I learned that this town didn't have any way to contact all of those people. I ended up calling Airbnb myself because I had a professional contact there. And it was the first time they were aware that this was happening. And then they shut down, they canceled reservations. But I was shocked that because so many properties are registered as LLCs or trusts in this town, we didn't really have information on the fly. There was no plug in a database and call. These people might be renting the house to people who could be coming from Manhattan with the virus, and I don't, nothing against them. My father lived in Manhattan and frankly passed from the virus. I think this gives us a way to say, if there's an emergency, there's a fire, there's some way we need to contact the people who are renting these condos and homes. It seems really basic to me that we have some kind of registration so that we can do that.
Thanks. I mean, I actually remember we actually did flyers and we had the police door knocking and leaving information in mailboxes like, you're not supposed to be here. It was, you know, that was a time. But yes, so, you know, if there is an emergency, then all this data, you know, and for long-term renters, for homeowners, I think I've said before, like if the information that we are getting out on how best to operate short-term rentals becomes the model, rather than saying, why aren't you making everybody do it? We received from the state the ability to do this related to short-term rentals. And I actually feel that it is that it's good policy to make your local, when you see the state going in a certain direction, there is a benefit to having, if they see like, okay, communities are taking care of this. I know there's a lot of, you know, not a mistrust or whatever, but in most everything related to zoning, we hear, you know, that if we can identify, if we can customize our what we want for our town, we are in a better position to keep it that way. Not always, but in a better position. So I think it is sound for us to take steps and have our own version of this in place. And then if there ever is a public, you know, like a COVID, God forbid, or some other, you know, things that could happen, floods, you know, those people in those homes probably don't have the Vermont alerts, right? Most of us are all registered for our Vermont alerts. But if we have a registry of all of those homes that are likely short-term rented, we can get information like, get out of there, the flood's coming, or, you know, whatever. It's just sound. And I think the point that I wanted to make, that if the behavior that we're modeling through short-term rentals becomes the bar that we should all be doing, there's been a lot of, I don't want to say argument, whatever, suggestion that all this could just be done voluntarily. Well, then do it. You know, like, then if we're like, if we set the bar with short-term rentals on really, really good behavior, there's nothing stopping the rest of us from copying that, right? And then that's, I guess that's all I want to say, is rather than, why aren't you making everybody? We have a little problem with this short-term rental community, and if we all think it's a really good idea, then let's do it. Damn. Any other questions?
Are there any other questions, Lisa?
I've
I'm
gotten
gonna
try
try
to do
answering
what we
them.
can.
Yeah, no more questions
Yeah,
to me
that's okay.
directly.
That's okay.
I've just gotten a few bunch of people wanting to add their names of support. So that's great. Thank you. If you want to keep ending your names, that would be awesome. Just send it to me as the host. But no
Or
other
if you know of
questions.
people you can talk to, if you know of people you can talk to who would like to be added to that list, that would be wonderful too.
If you think that this, we'll talk as a group, if you think that this recording would be helpful for you to share with a friend, let us know. We weren't really sure whether we were gonna record it or whether, but, if you feel like it would be a tool that you could use to give to a friend, great. We would like to do this again. If there's a group, like if you go out and say, oh, I know some people, I don't think we have a date set, but anything that you need from us to help you understand, help someone else understand, or they just want to ask questions, like they just are interested enough to want to ask questions, please point them our way, or I hope that you feel better armed to answer those questions.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Ooh, I'm getting
Yeah.
tons of people saying that they're in support. So I'm very grateful. I'm writing down all of your
Yay.
names. And we will figure out the rest of this. We're a last minute non-organized group.
If I can make one suggestion, if any of the people whose names you're getting would like to even host a little get together at their house, I'm sure one of us can go, or both of us, we only have like 3 weeks before this vote. And so if you want to gather people who might have questions, we're looking just again for an informational sort of thing, not a debate. But in-person copy talk, all that sort of stuff really is effective. And we want to be there for people who would like to further understand more about this and couldn't make it today.
Because I can't help myself.
So let Josie or Lisa know.
Can I add, for those who are
Sorry,
still
Lisa?
on, just one other thing? This is important legislation, but it's not life or death. What's important, I think, about this is that a lot of time and good work went into this. A year of select board, and I have to say, a lot of staff time. Like these things, like every select board meeting is supported by a lot of staff research and a lot of staff time. So keeping this on the table, or just abandoning it, if you think this is a good idea, you like the idea of the ordinance, but what's the big deal? I'm not going to show up. I don't care that much. I don't have an STR. There's a bigger thing, and that the town has a lot to tackle. And if you think this was good, positive legislation, and that this data is going to be helpful for the housing studies that we all want, no, it's not life or death, but it would be really supportive for staff and town, and for you to show up and express your willingness or your actual desire for this work to happen. So that's sort of where I fall out on it.
And again, we did get one last question. No. And it's topical to what you just said, because I think that I think it's really important to drill home. Like, for example, the pet ordinance was done in 1982, and it has been revised. Trust me, read it this morning, never really read it, multiple times. The latest was 2015. It is revised. It is updated, it is changed, it is evolved, it is tweaked based on needs, information, etc. The vote on May 1st is to rescind or not. And I'll just be very clear. A week ago today, I and a bunch of other people here and a bunch of other people on the call asked the select board what would happen if it's rescinded, and no one would commit to what would be the next steps. And frankly, all that time and effort that Lisa and taxpayer dollars will have gone to waste. So if you are interested in changing different vernacular, you know, in the things, because that's, I've gotten that feedback too. I want to change this little word and that little word. And the funny thing is that little word was another little word in the previous version.
Yeah.
And it's been changed 100 times. Like that little word changed into this word. And then we took that copy from someone who was against the ordinance. And we changed this, we changed the date, we did this, all of this stuff. So if you're interested in that, vote to keep the ordinance and show up to a select board meeting and argue your point that it needs to be changed. Don't rescind it. That would be my vote, because rescinding it means we are back at square one and we've wasted time and effort and taxpayer money, and doing nothing is a choice. And right now, that's my opinion. Anyways, that's my bandstanding, and I was hoping to answer that little question.
Anyone else? All right, everybody, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you. We'll keep you all posted.